Thank you, Abhinav. It is a great opportunity for all of us that we will be hearing about the legendary leader of Assam Socialist Movement, Sri Golap Barbora, from his grandson Abhinav Barbora, who is a research scholar in History Department in JNU. This is centenary year of a selfless leader who created a standard of morality and ethics in public life when he became first chief minister, first non-Congress chief minister in 1977. But his story goes back 20 years. He was one of the comrades of Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia when he started exploring the realities of northeastern India, and Sri Golap Barbora was with him when he was arrested while entering the Defa area, which is called now Arunachal Pradesh. He was one of the first thinkers, Ram Manohar Lohia, who looked at Northeast as integral part of Indian reality. But he didn't believe in centralization. He believed in autonomy, he believed in identity, and identity and unity were two objectives of his efforts of nation building. Golap Barbora was his partner. When he began working for society, for the trade unions under Hindu Mazdoor Sabha, he had not completed his law degree, but the call of society made him leave his education incomplete and work for the masses. And that was a mission which he continued till the very end of his life in the beginning of the 21st century. I welcome Sri Abhinav Barbora, who has been a pilot in the centenary program of this great leader. And we hope that after his presentation of half an hour to 40 minutes, there will be some opportunity for some questions also. I welcome all of you who have taken time out to hear Abhinav Barbora and remember Golap Barbora. Welcome all. Thank you. Over to Abhinav Barbora.
Thank you, Professor Kumar. And a very warm good evening to each and every one of you who have turned up for today's talk. I think the fact that after a long day at 8 o'clock in the evening, the fact that many of us are still gathering together to listen to the ideas of stalwarts associated with the socialist movement, it shows that many people in our country are still interested in the ideals of Ram Manohar Lohia, in the ideals of Jayaprakash Narayan, and in the larger message that the socialist movement has given to all of us. The fact that we are all interested, or there are still a lot of people who are interested in the socialist movement, it also gives us a reason to hope that this interest would inspire people in the days and years to come to work for reinvigorating and restoring the health of the socialist movement once again. With this sense of hope, I would like to actually move on to today's topic. And I would also like to thank the organizers for taking this initiative to remember Golap Barbora. I think the initiative that Samajwadi Sangam has been taking, not just to remember Golap Barbora, but to keep the larger legacy of the socialist movement alive, is very important, and more so in the times that we live. For many of our generation, as well as those younger to us, for them, unfortunately, their awareness of socialist movement has actually gone down to regarding the socialist movement or socialist politics to be synonymous to just the handful of socialist parties of North India, or probably to 2 or 3 families based out of Patna and out of Lucknow. And that is why I once again like to congratulate and underline the important role that this forum is playing in keeping the legacy of the socialist movement alive. Being asked to speak on Golap Barbora is, of course, a matter of great delight. I mean, all of us would love to speak on someone that we love. Golap Barbora was my grandfather, so of course, for me, it is a personal delight to speak on him and to talk about his legacy. But I think I am rejoicing this opportunity to speak in front of this audience today, because by speaking about Golap Barbora, what I also get to do is that I get a chance not only to remember Golap Barbora, not only to remember some of his colleagues, but also to discuss the larger socialist movement in Northeast India, particularly in Assam, a a thriving arena of socialist politics, which has, however, been completely overlooked by the mainstream discourse on socialism in our country. This is something that Professor Anand Kumar and I keep on lamenting during our conversations, that for whatever reason be it, but the socialists of Northeast India have been completely forgotten. And like I said, through this brief address, I basically would like to take the opportunity to restate the legacy of not just Golap Barbora, but a larger socialist movement that thrived in this part of the Indian subcontinent. So, what I would be doing today is that for the next 30 to 40 minutes, this is how I plan to make my presentation. I would first begin by talking about or mentioning some of the more momentous landmark moments of Golap Barbora's life and political career. That would give the listeners a sense of the chronology of his life and his times, starting from his birth till his death. Like I said, I would basically present the major landmark moments of his life and political career. This in turn would give me kind of a skeletal framework, and thereafter I would use this skeletal framework and go back to some of these temporal moments, some of these moments from his life, from his political career, to actually dwell and discuss the larger context of the socialist movement that prevailed around that point of time in Assam, and the larger kind of developments that were taking place in Assam, and how socialist politics was actually responding to it. And this is how I feel that on one hand, we would be able to get an idea and maybe reintroduce Golap Barbora to a larger audience. And through a discussion on Golap Barbora and his times, we would also be able to shed some light, at least, on the legacy and contributions of socialist politics in Assam. Now, I think I would begin by going back to the time when Golap Barbora was born. He was born, of course, in August 1925. So, as we are so last year marked the 100th birth centenary of Golap Barbora, and the state government has also taken an initiative to commemorate Golap Barbora's birth centenary. A publication has been brought out by the government. Professor Kumar again has contributed an excellent essay in that volume. And along with it, there are a number of civil society organizations that have also taken it upon themselves to remember Golap Barbora. And again, this centenary lecture, of which today we are a part of, is also a small initiative again to remember Golap Barbora in his 100th birth anniversary. So he was born in 1925 and he joined the Socialist Party in 1948. So Golap Barbora was not one of those leaders who like his more senior party colleagues who were initially part of the Congress, part of the CSP, and then came out and became part of the Socialist Party. But I think the first political party that Golap Barbora ever joined was the Socialist Party when it was formed in 1947 in Assam. Thereafter, in 1968, 67 to be more precise, Golap Barbora was elected as the National General Secretary of the SSP, Samyukta Socialist Party. Now, here again, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that for an individual who actually held the leadership of the undivided Socialist Party, it is actually a pity that we have the mainstream socialist discourse has almost completely ignored such an individual. In 68, thereafter, Golap Barbora was elected to the Rajya Sabha on an SSP nomination. And it needs to be remembered that he became the first member of the opposition to be elected to the Rajya Sabha from Assam. In 1974, at the call of George Fernandez, the railway strike started, And in Assam, of course, Golap Barbora was one of those who led the strike, and he was again arrested for almost 6 months during the railwaymen strike. During the emergency, again, like the national leadership, Golap Barbora was also amongst the first leaders from the state of Assam to be arrested. He was incarcerated for almost 19 months. And it should be noted that even after the emergency was lifted and most of the political prisoners were released in Assam, Golap Barbora was still withheld. And in fact, Golap Barbora, along with another socialist, Biswa Goswami, both of them hold the distinction of being the last political prisoners to be released in Assam after the end of the emergency. Then, of course, we all know, and this part of his life is more well documented. 1978, he becomes Assam's first non Congress chief minister. He was in office for 18 months, initiated some major reforms about which we would be talking. But of course, his government was short lived, and just after 18 months, his government collapsed. Thereafter, the Assam agitation started, and from 1979 to 1985, Barbora was part of the Assam agitation. He was part of some of the major deliberations that shaped the course of the Assam movement. But the end of the Assam movement also marked the beginning of a new strand of politics in the state of Assam. That is, the AGP was formed, and regional politics actually gained a new foothold. And that also marked basically the effective demise of not only socialist politics in Assam, but also of Golap Barbora's active political career. By 2002, he had left the Samata party, and in 2006, Golap Barbora actually left for his heavenly abode. So this roughly is the life, the trajectory of Golap Barbora's life, as well as some of the major landmarks of his political career. Now, one of the places that we can go back, and this is where I would first like to devote some attention, is back to the formative years of Golap Barbora. Golap Barbora, like I said, was born in 1925 in Golaghat, and then he grew up in a place called Tinsukia. And in 1939, what happens were two major incidents that actually shaped Golap Barbora's future political orientation. When we talk about Golap Barbora's anti-Congressism, Golap Barbora's attraction to socialism, I have hypothesized many a times that probably we can actually trace the source of his bent or his turn towards socialism or his anti-Congressism to these two incidents that happened in 1929. So what are these two incidents? The first one, 1939 marked the first ever oil strike that took place in Assam. And the oil strike took place in the Digboy oil refinery. I would like to state here that the Digboy refinery also happens to be the first oil refinery that was set up in the whole of Asia. So in 1939, a worker strike breaks out. And one of the leaders of this worker strike was a man called Kamal Barbora, who was Golap Barbora's father. He was a labor union leader. He was an employee of the oil company and also a labor union leader. He participated in the strike and also got suspended from work. After a few months, many of the strikers had actually come into an understanding with the government, and they went back to work, putting the strike effectively to its conclusion. But Golap Barbora's father, he vowed never to return back to work under British imperial interests, and decided actually to give up work for the rest of his life. The dedication that his father had shown, not on just to fight British imperial interests, but the dedication that he had shown to raise the banner of workers' rights, was something that deeply influenced the young Golap Barbora. To a great extent, I argue that it was the first incident that actually exposed Golap Barbora both to the plight of workers as well as to the importance of a robust, uncompromising workers' movement. Now, what is the second incident that also, as I have argued, shaped Golap Barbora in his formative years? So, just around the time when the oil strike was being waged in Digboi, in Dibrugarh, which was a town some 100 kilometers away from Digboi, in Dibrugarh, there was another strike that was actually gaining ground. It was a strike of the local steamship workers. Who the Dibrugarh is basically a town situated in the on the banks of the Brahmaputra, and it had a big fleet of steamships, and so the workers who were employed in those ships, they were the ones who had actually raised the banner of revolt, and they were being led by a local district congress leader. Just like the strike in Digboi, the Dibrugarh strike had also started gaining a lot of influence. And just as it was gaining more and more strength, very interestingly, and this is something that not many people know, the All India Congress Committee sends a directive to the Assam Pradesh Congress Committee that the involvement of the Dibrugarh District Congress Committee in that strike should be ended, and directed the Congress workers of Dibrugarh to actually abort the strike. When the local Congress committee decided against, at least a dominant faction of the local Congress committee decided against aborting the strike, the AICC, what it did was that it suspended the entire set of leaders who were involved in that strike. So for Golap Barbora, that incident had left him deeply shaken. Here on one hand was his father, who was valiantly leading a strike in a place called Digboi, and in neighboring Dibrugarh, the Congress party was asking its own leaders actually to leave the side of the workers and abort a strike which was actually on the verge of being very successful. I argue that this second incident, what it did was that it produced a lifelong distrust in Golap Barbora for the Congress party, and that is what shaped his anti-Congressism in the years to come. Shortly after these developments, by the mid-40s, Golap Barbora went to Calcutta, and there, as a young student of Bangabashi College, he had a first-hand experience of listening to leaders like Ram Manohar Lohia, as well as Jayaprakash Narayan, who were probably in one of the most golden phases of their political career. And he was deeply inspired by them. And in 1947, when the socialist movement actually institutionalized into the Assam chapter of the Socialist Party, Golap Barbora officially becomes part of the newly constituted Socialist Party in Assam. Since I am also shedding light on the larger socialist movement of the period in Assam, I would like to also bring to the notice that it was towards the end of 1947 that the Socialist Party was officially formed in Assam. And it was in Jorhat district in Upper Assam where the first where the meeting was actually held that approved the first committee of the state committee of the socialists. And in that committee, the committee was presided by a person called Honkar Borua, and its general secretary was a person by the name of Horeswar Goswami. After the formation of the Assam chapter of the Socialist Party, the party started taking up a number of concerns in Assam, and it started actually raising a number of valid questions. Now, the first of these questions, and it's important that I take you through these questions because, again, along with understanding Golap Barbara's life and career, understanding the kind of questions that the socialists in Assam took up, it would allow for the listeners to appreciate the ways in which the Socialist Party followed a similar line, like the All India, similar line to the National Party, and the ways in which the socialists in this part of the country actually managed to, what I argue, managed to evolve a very distinct political position for themselves, relevant to the contextual factors in Assam as well. So the first issue that the socialists powerfully took up once once the new party was constituted was, of course, the question of the land question, for that matter. Now, I've written it in my notes that um, if we go back to the land question, we would see that the socialists elsewhere in the country as well, and of course, if we go back to writings of Lohia and what he was doing at the national level, what JP was also doing at a national level, of course, the land question did assume a lot of importance for the Socialist Party in general across the country. And Assam, as far as the land question was concerned, was not an exception. Landlessness was, of course, identified as a major problem, and land distribution was, of course, the major demand that the socialists made from the government. Now, here at the same time, it's important that I narrate an interesting incident. It's an anecdote of sorts, but again, we can understand the influence as well as the goodwill that the socialists had, and the commitment basically to the question of landlessness in Assam. So, in their early days, I think in the early 1950s, one of the major satyagrahas on the land question that the socialists had led was in a place called Doyang. Now, Doyang is a region in the Assam Nagaland border, and it's placed, therefore, in the Upper Assam region of the state. Now, in Doyang, there were vast tracts of unused land which were part of a number of tea gardens. And the socialists had actually launched a protracted satyagraha demanding that the land be actually taken out from the control of the tea gardens and redistributed to the landless. A protracted struggle was led by the president, as I mentioned, by under the leadership of Shankar Borua. And young Golap Barbora, who was based in Tinsukia, would come all the way down to Golaghat, some almost 200 kilometers away, and the entire lot of socialists would be camping in Doyang, and they led out a protracted struggle. Of course, the struggle, despite the force of it, the satyagraha was unsuccessful. But what is interesting to note here is that while the young socialists like Golap Barbora were unsuccessful to get land for the landless in Doyang, that issue had always remained in their hearts. 30 years later, when in 1978 Golap Barbora becomes the chief minister, one of the first things that he does is that he decides to redistribute land to the landless peasants in that Doyang region. The goodwill or the initiative taken by the socialists endeared the local people to socialist politics to such an extent that they had decided to name the new village that came up in that area as a socialist satyagraha village. Even till today, if you visit that area, that village, in revenue records, as well as there are signboards in the entrance to that village, which mentions the name of the village as the Socialist Satyagrahi village. So the land question, like I said, was one of the major concerns that the socialists of Assam had taken up. And I have also argued that this was one question which was largely similar to what socialists elsewhere in the country were also taking up, including Lohia and Jayaprakash. Now, let me mention two other issues where I feel that the socialists in Assam need to be studied, because here they are also found to be improvising the kind of agenda that we're formulating for the state of Assam. And this is also why it's important to actually study the socialists of Assam, because mainstream socialist movement did not actually take up these issues in the way that the socialists had done. So what is the next issue that I am about to talk? The socialists in Assam, remember, they were based in a frontier state, and the state was bordering Arunachal Pradesh, like Professor Kumar had said, which was at that point of time known as NEFA. So NEFA, for those of you, I'm sure most of the audience already know what NEFA stands for, but for those of you who might not be aware, NEFA stands for the Northeast Frontier Region. So that was the previous name of Arunachal Pradesh. Now, we should remember that at that point of time in the immediate post-independence movement, uh, India's tribal, the Indian government's tribal policy was largely formulated by an individual called Verrier Elwin. And Verrier Elwin's idea was that the tribal regions of the Northeast should be kept isolated and separated from the rest of the country. And this idea became official policy. As a result, what happened was that in present day Arunachal Pradesh, back in the day, uh, the region was deliberately kept isolated from the rest of the country. There was no effective democratic representation, or there was a dearth of representative institutions, and governance was carried out only through bureaucratic interventions in that region. And people from outside the NEFA, people from outside Arunachal Pradesh, were prohibited from freely entering NEFA, and only government officials were had the sole permission to visit that place. The socialists of Assam played an important role in articulating the greater integration of Northeast India, especially places like NEFA and Nagaland, with the larger idea of the Indian subcontinent. It has always been miscommunicated, and it leads to a lot of misunderstanding that by integration, the socialists of Assam, or even Lohia for that matter, was actually advocating assimilation. But Golap Barbora himself at that point of time had written an article where he was clearly mentioning that the socialists were merely interested with the greater integration of Northeast India with the larger idea of the Indian nation. They were interested in promoting democratic institutions inside Northeast, inside Arunachal Pradesh. And finally, they wanted that there is free movement of people from outside the Northeast to NEFA, and from NEFA to outside. This entire idea of keeping the Northeast separated and isolated, Golap Barbora argued, was actually was detrimental for those living inside NEFA, because they had no idea. In the name of protecting their culture, they were actually being forced to live in a more primitive state. This was also a position that Lohia had. And the Northeast, basically, it's important that we talk about this, because the Northeast was the area where Lohia actually, the Lohia's vision about larger national integration, Northeast was the site where he was actually expounding such a view. So in order to challenge this entire central government policy of keeping the Northeast isolated and prohibiting free entry of Indians into NEFA, what Lohia did was that he led 3 successive satyagrahas by trying to illegally enter into NEFA. Like I said, it was impossible for any ordinary Indians to go to Arunachal Pradesh, and only government officials or those with the government who were sponsored by the government could enter Arunachal Pradesh. The first satyagraha to illegally enter NEFA was led by Dr. Lohia in 1957. And in that first visit, again, it was the Assam socialists who actually played the supportive role, and who had actually accompanied Lohia from Assam all the way to the Assam NEFA border in a place called Jairampur, from which Lohia was effectively stopped from entering and was returned back to Assam. That was the first visit. And like I said, it was the Assam socialists who were on the ground with Lohia and facilitating and accompanying him in that visit. He again visited Nefa unsuccessfully after a year. And then finally in 1963, after the Chinese War, when India's northeastern policy was as it is under attack, that Lohia made his third attempt to enter Nefa illegally. And in this and on that visit as well, Golap Barbora, Kiran Bezborua, these socialist Assam socialist leaders had accompanied him, and that was the first time. Not only did he trespass the border, but he managed to go all the way to a place called Bomdila, further inside Nefa, and he became the first Indian, or the entire entourage that also included Golap Barbora. That entourage became the first batch of Indians who could actually enter Nefa and return back without getting arrested, despite not being sponsored, despite their visit not being sponsored by the government. I would argue that this satyagraha, led by Lohia and supported by the Assam socialists, played a decisive role in relaxing the isolationism that was practiced by the central government for the regions, or for certain selected regions of the Northeast. The third concern, where again I feel that the socialists were taking up a more distinctive policy position, and something that we do not find very prominently in the mainstream socialist politics or in the mainstream socialist movement, was that the socialists in Assam, they powerfully took up the question of relative deprivation. So what I feel was that for a lot of socialists in mainstream in North India, for them, just as caste was a very mobilizable category, in Assam, caste, at least caste prejudices were very valid, but it was not a very politically active category for the purposes of political mobilization. It was, as a political category, caste was largely mute and dormant, I feel. And for the Assam socialists, therefore, caste was never an axis around which they mobilized their politics, but more importantly, the category or the unit of oppression that they made a centerpiece of their political program was relative deprivation. So the relationship of the Indian state to Assam was framed in a way where the region, that is Assam, was interpreted as the category of oppression, as the category of backwardness, and as the category that required political intervention. So just like for ending caste discrimination, you needed political intervention. So for the Assam socialists, they articulated powerfully the concern and the problem of relative deprivation. Now, here it is interesting to also note that unlike the question of relative deprivation was also taken up by a lot of secessionary movements. But again, the Lohiites and the socialists, they did not take that route, but rather, for them, the solution to relative deprivation,
कौन सी के सब्जी मिले जाए कल रे
yeah, the solution to relative deprivation lay in making greater claims for development on the Indian state. So development, therefore, assumed a lot of importance in the political discourse and in the political agenda of the socialists in Assam. And they articulated important developmental questions, again framed in the typical relative deprivation framework. Two important developmental questions that they took up, which corroborate the argument that I'm making, is the first one of those is the active participation of the socialists in the second refinery movement. Now, as you know, Assam is a major oil producing region, and in 1901 the Digboi refinery that I talked about in the beginning of my presentation was established. In the late in the 1950s, the central government decides to establish an oil refinery, and to the dismay of the socialists, it was decided that the refinery would not be established in Assam, but would be established in neighboring Barauni. Now, this was something that the socialists seized upon to actually push forward their argument that the centered or the central government is actually depriving, deliberately keeping Assam deprived, and they had actually jumped into what is known as the second refinery movement. And again, Gulab Barbora was an active participant of this movement, and even today, of course, the movement led to finally the center yielding to the demand, and a refinery, the second refinery of Assam, was established in Guwahati. So even today, if you visit the Guwahati refinery, there is a plaque that has the names of all those valiant activists, the leaders who had actually strived for the setting up of a second refinery. And there you can find the names of not just Gulab Barbora, but a number of these Assam socialists. At the same time, the developmental question was articulated by making demands about other major developmental initiatives, by demanding larger infrastructural projects in the region. One of the slogans, again, which corroborates the fact that the socialists of Assam were consciously articulating a discourse of relative deprivation, was the way they framed their demand for a bridge over the Brahmaputra. So till the 1960s, the first part of 1960s, the mighty Brahmaputra did not have a single bridge. And the socialists of Assam, again, I'm trying to corroborate the argument that relative deprivation was a conscious discourse that they were using. The slogan that they used was that in Hindi, जब गंगा का ऊपर 10 पुले है तो ब्रह्मपुत्र का ऊपर एक भी क्यों नहीं. So basically, what it translates to is that when there were 10 bridges over the Ganges, why was there not a single bridge over the Brahmaputra? I think this is a clear expression of how the discourse of relative deprivation was sought to be articulated. In 1978, as we know, Gulab Barbora becomes Assam's chief minister. That was the first non-Congress government. That was, of course, the only time, unfortunately, that the socialists managed to assume power in the state. And again, if we look at the brief period of Gulab Barbora for 18 months, we again see how during those few months, the government actually tried to translate socialists after securing executive power. They had stayed true, at least Gulab Barbora also stayed true to the larger Lohiite politics, and he tried to translate Lohiite ideology into concrete practice. I'll just quickly mention two. Of course, we do know that Lohia and the socialists in general had share a very robust version of social justice politics. And the moment Gulab Barbora assumed power as chief minister, he tried again to concretely realize the social justice agenda. And one of the ways he tried to do this was that on the first day, right after becoming chief minister, the first initiative that Gulab Barbora took was to make education free for all till class 10. I think if you think about it, it's really bewildering that for a state as backward as Assam was back 45 years ago, the successive governments till then had never even decided to take such a simple initiative. And the moment Gulab Barbora becomes chief minister, the first thing that he does, true to the socialist vision, was to make education accessible for everyone living in Assam. The second important initiative, and again where I would like to underline that we see a very clear link with Lohia, was his policy for small tea gardens. Now, of course, I have not found Lohia writing anything about small tea gardens. But how do I then? Why do I then argue that there is a clear link between this policy of small tea gardens that was implemented by the Golap Barbora government and to the Lohiite political program or the social justice program? Now, I think I would like to, like all of you, to remember and recall that Lohia talks about something called the small unit machine. And what was the small unit machine? The small unit machine was basically a form of industrial development that was less capital intensive and that was also more labor intensive. Right, that was the basic premise of the small unit machine. On one hand, it would be less capital intensive, and on the other hand, like I said, it would be absorbing more labor. So till the 1970s, the tea industry of Assam was completely dominated by big capital. Now that is a given. You had big industrial big capitalist groups. Many of them headquartered either in Calcutta or many of them headquartered in Scotland and in England. Those were the players who had completely exercised their stranglehold in the tea industry of Assam. What Golap Barbora realizes is that because of such a stranglehold, it is impossible for Assamese middle class youths or lower middle class entrepreneurs to even set foot in this lucrative tea industry. So what does Golap Barbora do? What does his government do? They devise this idea of the small tea garden. Basically, any Assamese youth who wants to enter and set up their own tea industry, they do not have to actually have those large tea plantations that we still see in Assam. But if you have some space in your backyard or in your front yard, you can actually plant the tea shrub, and thereafter you can send it to a local factory for its production and thereby get a certain revenue out of the entire process. As a result, it allowed a lot of Assamese. I'm so sorry. It allowed
calling emergency services.
Sorry. It allowed a lot of Assamese lower middle class and middle class youths to join the tea industry. And to tell you a legacy of the Assam Socialists, today, when you travel the length and breadth of Assam, you would see these small patches of tea plantations sprouting in the front yards or in the backyards of the people of Assam. And as an estimate goes, I don't know how reliable is it, but as a rough estimate goes, there are almost 1 lakh small tea growers who are actually part of the tea industry, despite not having a large tea plantation. These lakhs of individuals are yet part of the tea industry by having the small tea gardens or the small tea plantations that they have developed in a small space available to them in the front yards and in the backyards of Assam, of their homesteads rather. Despite such a legacy, it's a tragedy that the socialist movement collapsed soon thereafter. The first non-Congress government collapsed in March 12th, 1979. The Assam agitation started. It introduced newer idioms of politics, and the erstwhile socialists' electoral base completely shifted over to the regional fold. The socialists, because of their own organizational weakness, as well as the kind of resource crunch that socialists across India of that era had always faced, they were unable to keep up to the changing tides that visited the politics of Assam. The socialists were also unable to inspire as well as develop an effective second line of leadership. So one by one, with the demise of this generation of socialist leaders, gradually we see the demise of, I would not like to use the word demise, but we also see the socialist movement completely fizzling out. With this, I would like to end my presentation. Once again, thank you everyone for being so patient and for tolerating me for a good 30 or 40 odd minutes. Thank you so much. Over to you, Professor Kumar.
Thank you so much, Abhinav. This is truly an inspiring lecture on Golap Barbora as a committed socialist and throughout architect of nation building. By highlighting his contribution to national integration, this lecture reminds us to actually understand the contribution of socialists like Dr. Lohia, Jayaprakash ji, also in nation building and nation integration, and also a kind of to bring democratic commitment to unity, justice, and collective responsibility. So such reflections, I think, help us to revisit and at the same time cherish the living and loving legacy of socialist tradition. So thank you so much, and now I request respected participant, आप कुछ सवाल अगर पूछना चाह रहे हैं तो अपना चैट बॉक्स में इंडिकेट कर दीजिए।
कि श्री अभिनव बरबोरा ने एक शानदार कहानी हम लोगों को बताई। एक ऐसा नौजवान जिसके पिता आंदोलन में थे और जो खुद 1948 से लेकर के 1975-77 तक लगातार एक पैर जेल में एक पैर रेल में रखता रहा। अभिनव ने संकोच की वजह से ये नहीं बताया कि उनके बाबा श्री गोलप बरबोरा आज भी असम की राजनीति में ईमानदारी और सादगी के श्रेष्ठ प्रतीक माने जाते हैं। चीफ मिनिस्टर तो बहुत हुए, लेकिन गोलप बरबोरा जैसा कोई नहीं हुआ। मैं बहुत धन्यवाद देता हूं अभिनव को और आशा करता हूं कि ये बातचीत आगे जारी रहेगी। धन्यवाद अभिनव।
थैंक यू सो मच सर, शुक्रिया।
There is somebody from Loya Vicharvedi in Kerala. It may be Reginald or somebody. Yes.
Anand Kumar ji, my Rajiv Kumar, Kerala.
Hello Rajiv ji, namaskar.
Lohia Vicharvedi, Kerala.
Yes, yes, please go ahead.
मुझे कुछ नहीं कहने के लिए है अभिनव जी की प्रेजेंटेशन मुझे बहुत खुशी हुई। हम लोग सभी मिलकर गुलाब बरबरा के स्मरण के आगे बढ़ने के लिए करना है। धन्यवाद सबको, धन्यवाद।
धन्यवाद राजीव जी, थैंक यू सो मच, थैंक यू सो मच। प्रोफेसर राजकुमार जैन, तबीयत खराब है लेकिन फिर भी बैठे हैं। राजकुमार जी।
मगर गोलब जी का जब नाम सामने आया तो मेरी पुरानी स्मृतियां जाग उठी। दिल्ली में जब वो संसद सदस्य के रूप में रहते थे तो उनसे कई बार मेरी मुलाकातें हुई, बातचीत होती थी। उनके पूरे इतिहास को जब हम असम के राजनीतिक सोशलिस्ट तहरीक के इतिहास के साथ जोड़कर देखते हैं तो मुझे अचंभा होता है। जिंदगी के आखिरी दम तक वो लोहिया के साथ पूरी मुस्तैदी के साथ जुड़े रहे। मैं उन दिनों की कल्पना कर सकता हूं कितना कठिन दौर वो रहा होगा। डॉक्टर लोहिया के ऊपर भाषा के सवाल को लेकर जिस तरह का अवरोध हमारे इन सब सीमावर्ती असम, नागालैंड, मणिपुर वगैरह के इलाके में था, उसके बावजूद गोलब जी सोशलिस्ट मूवमेंट में जमे रहे, लगातार डॉक्टर साहब के साथ दुर्गम यात्राओं में, बहुत ही परेशानी के दिन थे, कठिनाइयों के दिन थे, उसमें वो एक आस्थावान वैचारिक सिपाही के रूप में वहां उसमें शामिल रहे। हालांकि मुल्क के पैमाने पर गोलब जी की पहचान मुख्यमंत्री बनने के बाद हुई, मगर हिंदुस्तान के सोशलिस्टों में उनकी पहचान जमीन से जुड़े हुए एक ऐसे नेता की थी जो हर और के खिलाफ सोशलिस्ट तहरीक के परचम को लहराने में लगा हुआ था। हम गौरवान्वित हैं, हमें फख्र है गोलब जी पर कि जो समाजवादी विचारधाराएं 1934 से शुरू हुए ये आंदोलन की अंतिम दौर तक वो मशाल बने रहे, और आज उनके ग्रैंडसन के इस वक्तव्य को सुनकर बहुत सांत्वना भी हुई और ये लगा कि मशाल कभी बुझेगी नहीं। साथ ही अभिनव, अब अपने दादा की परंपरा को उसको बरकरार रखकर समाजवादी आंदोलन के साथ जुड़कर पुनर्जीवित करेंगे, बढ़ाएंगे, इसी आशा विश्वास के साथ मैं उनका बहुत तहे दिल से शुक्रिया करते हुए गोलब जी के प्रति अपने श्रद्धा सुमन अर्पित करता हूं।
बहुत धन्यवाद राजकुमार जी, आप अस्वस्थ होने के बावजूद आपने अभिनव को आशीर्वाद दिया, इसके लिए बहुत धन्यवाद आपको।
शुक्रिया।
आनंद जी, मैं कुछ कहूं?
हाँ बोले शशि जी। शशि शेखर जी सत्यवती कॉलेज ऑफ पॉलिटिकल साइंस के हेड हैं, प्रोफेसर शशि शेखर सिंह।
It's a wonderful presentation and very enlightening.
Thank you.
बहुत ही बुद्धिपरक और ज्ञानप्रद था, and it helped me to know more about the socialist movement in Assam, and of course under the leadership of our great socialist leader Golap Barbora. So बहुत enlightening था। और as far as the Golap Barbora's contribution in socialist movement is concerned, it is also a great pleasure to tell you today is the 10th anniversary of our great socialist leader Karpuri Thakur. आज उनकी भी पुण्यतिथि है, and he also played very important role in Bihar. He was a very honest and sincere socialist leader. So it's very nice to listen to you, and बहुत विस्तार से आपने दिया है, and even the question of integration of the northeast and the kind of reference that you have made regarding the गंगा पे 10 पुल हैं तो ब्रह्मपुत्र पर एक भी क्यों नहीं है। I mean, ये जो relative deprivation पर जो आपने रखा, तो मुझे लगता है कि it's very enlightening, and I'm really very happy to listen to you, and I hope we will listen you in future too, because you are emerging scholar, and of course a true kind of socialist. I think so, young socialist, and following the legacy of your grandfather Golap Barbora. और एक और बात जो उसमें आपने बताई थी, जो मुझे कि आपके दादा के पिताजी भी जो हैं वो उस समय के वर्कर्स के मूवमेंट जो रिफाइनरी को और वो लेकर के उसमें वो भी he was also part of
Right,
that
right.
working class movement.
Right. And in fact, Golap Barbora's great-grandfather, he was part of the
Great-grandfather.
Sepoy Mutiny.
Okay.
And there is written evidence of him getting arrested during the Sepoy Mutiny, 1857, and he was deported to the
wow.
cellular jail. And
This is another information. This is another information regarding the Sipai Mutiny or the first war of independence you're talking about.
right,
आप उस 1857 की बात कर रहे थे ना?
right. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much, and of course we will see you in future too.
Definitely.
And I hope as our Rajkumar Jain Sahab has told कि आप socialist movement में as a young scholar you will play important role and contribute your understanding about the socialist movement. At the same time, the failures of the socialist movement, not only in Northeast or Assam, even in India, we want to learn and know about it, because failure को बिना जाने आप जो हैं success की ओर बढ़ नहीं सकते. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I think we can conclude now, and I request Dr. Anil Thakur to propose a vote of thanks for my dear Abhinav Barbora, and we hope that we'll hear him again because he has a lot to tell us and we have a lot to learn.
Kumarji, and it is very happy to see Abhinav Barbora ji to you.
Thank you.
So, December last, we organized Lohya Vijaravedi in Kerala. We organized the centenary program of Golap Barbora ji. Ayub Barbora ji participated, and other many great personalities from Assam participated in that meeting. So many things were there at that meeting, and the another part of it was presented by you just now. Thank you so much, and we hope that in future you will contribute more in the socialist movement, and let me invite you to Kerala.
Definitely.
Very nice. Thank you, Reginald. Thank you. Anybody else? कोई और? निवेदन करता हूँ प्रोफेसर विनय भारद्वाज, हिस्टोरियन, मिरांडा कॉलेज, कि वो अपनी तरफ से वोट ऑफ थैंक्स प्रपोज करें. प्रोफेसर विनय भारद्वाज.
Thank you so much, Anubhav, for your lovely presentation. It made us proud of the socialist ideals carried forward by your grandfather, but it also made us sad that the reasons for which socialist movement failed or got weakened in Assam are the same reasons it is getting weaker in rest of the India. But we hope that in days to come, the young generation will carry on this legacy. It's a very formidable legacy. Thank you very much for giving us very informative and inspiring presentation. We hope to hear more from you in days to come. And thank you all the participants. Thank you, Anandji. Thank you all the friends.
Thank you very much. Thank you.